I would like to welcome on screen Mr. Raian Karanjawala, Managing Partner, Karanjawala and Company. His topic for the session is role of law firms in the post-pandemic world, challenges, changes, and the road ahead. And to introduce him further, may I please invite Dr. Batra back again on the screen.
The business world and legal world, you are very audible. So first of all, let me introduce Mr. Karanjawala. He really doesn't need an introduction. But as it is customary to put a context, let me tell you he's had 40 plus years of experience as a legal eagle. I think the last 30 years he's been super established. So he's the go-to lawyer for very prominent people. He's known to be the advisor to the prominent figures in the business and government. He's a renowned litigation lawyer with a great legal acumen and is an excellent strategist. He is rated amongst the top lawyers in arbitration and dispute resolution matters. He also representing Rupert Murdoch. I can only say that he's a role model for a lot of successful lawyers, not just budding lawyers. So over to you, Mr. Raian Karanjawala. Look forward to your comments and your insights.
Thank you, Anurag. And thank you, Business World. When I got the topic of today's discussion for me, which is the role of law firms in the post-pandemic era. What stays, what changes, what are the challenges ahead? I quite enjoyed the thought that I would speak on something like this. And whilst preparing, I realized that you can't really speak about the future unless you also dwell in detail on the past. And therefore, in the course of this conversation, I'm going to touch upon and deal with three separate topics. One is the old normal in the legal profession, and especially in the context of litigation. The other is the new normal. And the third is what we will call the next normal. How will that be? When will it come upon us? What challenges will we face? So first, let me deal with the old normal, especially in the context in which I understand it. For me, the old normal began somewhere in the year 1979. And it continues all the way till the year 2019, because that was the 40 years of experience in the practice of law, in the practice of litigation that I have had. And I will then later on contrast the beginning of the old normal with the ending of the old normal, because between 1979 and 2019, there was almost a 180-degree turn. And let me start and explain to you what I mean. When I joined the bar in 1979, the first and most important thing to remember was that lawyers were fewer in number. Law in those days, you will recollect, was not a very coveted profession. Most people didn't go towards law. They took upon it as a sort of an abode of last refuge. In those days, I still remember when we used to go to the Supreme Court. That's where I started my practice under Praveen Parekh. When we were in the Supreme Court at 10:30, when we'd be at the corridor, looking down at the car park before the court began, you would find at best 10, 15, 20 cars parked over there. Today, if you seek to go, and even if they have car parking for 5,000 cars, they'll still be all jam-packed. That's the difference in the number of people who participate today in the practice of law between 79 and 19. The second thing to remember was that the practice of law in those days was largely individual-centric. For example, the firms were few and far between. The kind of practice that you saw in those days was as follows. You would have an individual lawyer. If he had a little extra practice, then he'd have one or two juniors functioning from a chamber or functioning from his home office. He'd get a client or two, deal with it, deal with the whole case himself, do the research, do the drafting, file it, go to court, argue it, obtain whatever order he did, and so on and so forth, and get on to the next case. The firms in those days were very few and far between. And just to rattle off a few names, there was Praveen Parekh where I was there. There was Bachu Shroff's old firm, Iron Shroff and Company. When Bachu Shroff died, Shardul purchased the firm. Amachand Mangaldas purchased the firm and Shardul shifted to Delhi. And that's how Amachal Mangaldas came to Delhi. There was a branch office of the old Bombay firm called Gagrat and Company. There were branch offices of the Calcutta firms Khaitans and the branch office of the other Calcutta firm, Ordingham. There was the old Rajendra Narayan and Company. There was Lalit Bhasin. And right at the top, there was Jimmy Dadachandji's firm. It was called JB Dadachandji and Company. And that, in fact, was a firm that could match any of the big firms of Bombay, whether it was Crawford Bailey or whether it was Mullah Mullah. But apart from these firms, and then perhaps Remfree Sagar was there at that time too, apart from these firms, the practice of law was largely in the hands of individuals. And the other thing to remember about the practice of law was that it was a very A versus B practice. For example, in the Supreme Court, when we practiced in those days, the practice would be landlord-tenant dispute, labor management dispute. In the High Court, there would be original side, money suits, things like that, matrimonial disputes. As far as the criminal work was concerned, what they call the Fauzdari lawyers would be practicing on the criminal side. But this was the kind of litigation there was, and this is how it stayed. Today, when you look upon the practice of law, you find that it is intensely specialized. Today, when you look upon the practice of law, you find that there are hundreds of lawyers practicing. In fact, in Delhi alone, 1 out of every 300 people is a lawyer. 60,000 lawyers practice in Delhi alone. And today, if you were to look at the firms, and supposing you were to bring out a booklet, we've got ourselves a Society of Indian Law Firms. If you were to bring out a directory of just the law firms, you would have quite a mid-sized booklet available today itself. And of course, the most important contrast is the fee. When I began my practice at the bar, in the Supreme Court, you could get a senior counsel, whether it was a Fali Nariman or a Sauri Surabhi or an Anil Diwan or an Ashok Desai or anyone you wanted, at a fixed fee of 1,040 rupees for an admission and 1,650 rupees for a final hearing. Last year, in one particular matter, to take a counsel out of town, my firm had to pay over 1 crore of rupees for 1 day's out-of-town appearance. So that is the sheer contrast you see between the profession when I joined it in 79 and the profession when we see it in the year 2019. In fact, yesterday I was in a talk show with Manu Singhvi and Rajiv Nair, and one of the first things that Manu himself mentioned was that while in the old days, law was the profession of the sort of last refuge, today, children of doctors, children of businessmen, children of architects leave and don't step into their father's profession, but in fact join the law, because law has suddenly become coveted. What happened? What changed it? Is it just a normal incremental growth that happens year to year as you go on? Or did something happen? But in my mind, two separate things happened which brought about the change. The first, in fact, happened before my very own eyes. And I can't be sure that was the very first incident of its kind. But it was certainly one of the earlier incidents of its kind. The year was 1981. I was sitting in courtroom number 2, Justice Bhagwati's court, waiting for Justice Bhagwati to come in at 10:30. Somewhere in 81 this was. Justice Bhagwati walked in, suddenly took out from his pocket a piece of paper and said in his own way, he says, "Yesterday I got this postcard and it is from so-and-so and he has set out these several grievances. So what I am going to do is, I'm going to request the registry to convert it into a writ petition." Then he passed a detailed order. He converted the postcard into a writ petition. He appointed Kapil Sibal as an amicus curiae. And with that, the court began on what is a very, very long road and a very, very well-traveled one today, namely the public interest litigation road. That itself fundamentally changed. That is one of the two fundamental changes to the practice of law. And the reason for it is this, as I told you earlier. Till then, everything was individualistic. the case was A versus B, C versus D, and so on. PILs changed all that. Suddenly, the impact of the court order could be felt reverberating across the board. Everyone was affected. Everyone was impacted. And let me give you 2-3 examples to just describe what I mean. For example, the first case which felt its impact was in the year 1982, Antule. In one stroke, Justice Bommy Lenton's judgment in the Bombay High Court unseated a chief minister. And the court suddenly, and the people and the country suddenly started feeling the impact of what can happen when a court exercises its powers. The other case, and this is again a personalized example, I remember was the case of, this was somewhere in the year 85, 86, I'm not quite sure. It was the case of the building Pratibha. In the old days, as far as Bombay was concerned, the builders were ruling the roost. They built, if they deviated from the norm or they built ahead of sanction, by and large the authorities turned a Nelson eye. People didn't sort of make too much of it, and if they did, then the builder went to court, got some kind of injunction. The building continued, tenants occupied it, owners occupied it, and things went on. And in that year, a group called the Bombay Environmental Action Group filed a writ petition in the Bombay High Court, it's the PIL, and said 3 floors of Pratibha or 2 floors of Pratibha have been built without sanction. They should be demolished. It was something quite unheard of in those days. Suddenly, the Bombay High Court passed an order and said these 3 floors have to be demolished. That impact was felt all across the board among the builder community in the whole of Bombay, and they all rushed to the Supreme Court. In those days, I was appearing on behalf of the Bombay Environmental Action Group. It was a case which came up before courtroom number 3. Justice Shabashachi Mukherjee was, I think, the presiding judge. On our side, we had briefed solely. His daughter Zia, who was at that time practicing actively on our side of the bar, came down to brief and instruct on behalf of the Bombay Environmental Action Group. On the other side was Fali Nariman. And it must be remembered that up to that point of time, it was generally felt by people, and common parlance was, that if Fali appeared, a well-prepared Nariman appeared, he was at his peak at that time. If a well-prepared Nariman appeared in a court for an admission matter, which was an important matter, then there was almost no chance that it would be rejected. That particular case was bitterly fought out, I remember, for almost an hour and a half at the stage of admission alone. And suddenly, Zia was there just harassing her dad all the time. Dad, point this out, dad, point this out, dad, point this out, dad. And Sori was arguing away on our side. Fali was thundering away on the other. It went on for an hour and a half. And suddenly, Justice Shabashachi Mukherjee just picked up the brief, thumped it on the table and said, dismissed. And that thud in that public interest litigation was felt across the whole builder community in Bombay. And that was for the first time that a part of a building had actually to be demolished. That was the kind of impact that public interest litigation started having. Then I remember years later, there was a case of MC Mehta. There was a very active public interest litigant called MC Mehta. So MC Mehta, whenever he had his cases, they used to come up in the Chief's Court, which is the larger court in the Supreme Court. And suddenly there would be about 400 lawyers appearing in those very cases alone. Because the kind of cases he filed impacted so many different industries, so many different clients. And the impact of PIL was that suddenly the courts came into everyone's house. Earlier, where a dispute used to be between one person A and person B, became a dispute that affected large parts of the community, lots of people in the country who were adversely affected. This is one of the things that propelled people towards the courts, propelled lawyers, not because they wanted to be public interest lawyers, no, but because suddenly law itself achieved such an important position in India that people suddenly started feeling that, this is the profession to go to. It's an important profession. It makes an impact. On the flip side of the coin, years later, Zia and I found ourselves on another PIL. This time we were on the other side of the coin. We were against the Bombay Environmental Action Group, where the Bombay Mill Land, it was called the Bombay Mill Land Matters. There the challenge before everyone was that when the mills were allowed to redevelop their land, they had to hand over a certain portion back to government for public utility. The question was, what was the portion to be handed over? And the Bombay Environmental Action Group filed a case saying, no, they have to hand back much more than they actually have. The impact of that case had we lost in terms of monetary value on the builder community has been computed between 20 to 30,000 crores. And fortunately, we lost in the High Court, we won in the Supreme Court. Zia and I were both on for different mill owners on that side. So the point I'm making is this gives you some example of the kind of impact that today a court has. Today, if you open a newspaper, in the old days, if you opened a newspaper, the courts would be mentioned once in 20 days, if at all. Today, if you open a newspaper, without doubt, you will find that almost 15 to 20% of the daily news in any newspaper pertains to what is being stated by the courts. So, this was the first thing that changed the profession of law. The second thing that changed the profession of law, and this was for everyone to see, was when Dr. Manmohan Singh gave his first budget and liberalized the Indian economy. That aspect of liberalization is something that has just forever changed the way and the manner in which law is practiced. There were many fields of law which in those days just never existed. Today, you have SEBI, you have IBC, you have IP, you have MRTP, you have the Competition Commission, you have the Consumer Forum, you have capital markets, you have M&A practices. All these are practices which were spawned by that aspect of liberalization. So these two things actually drove the profession in such a manner that it changed. It changed completely in the course of 40 years, not necessarily at the same pace, but slowly, inexorably, there was no doubt about the fact that things were going to change and have changed. Today, law is a coveted profession. Today, if somebody says, Mama, I want to be a lawyer, they won't say, don't be silly, yaar. Go and study medicine. Everyone will say, haan, beta, zarur jana. Because there's a lot of money in it. And it's also a profession that gives us a lot of value. So that is what I have to say about what we call the old normal. Now, what does the new normal bring to us? The new normal has fundamentally, it's been there only for about the last 5 to 6 months, and I hope it goes away as soon as it can. The new normal brings about two different things. Two things have happened in the new normal. I don't know, some of you may recollect when the first satellite phone was advertised. It was a phone called Iridium. And it came out, the advertisement came out in the paper, full scale, full page ad, photograph of the phone. And on top, there were 3 words. Geography becomes history. That is what virtual hearing has done for advocacy in the courts. Today, I was speaking yesterday again at some this thing between Manu, Rajiv Nair and myself, and I gave an example. I said in the old days, the legendary counsel of our time was a man called Ashok Sen, and Ashok Sen was also quite a sort of he was a counsel who almost never said no to a matter. The rumor goes that on one particular day in a private plane, he finished a matter in the Simla High Court early in the morning, flew to Chandigarh, did a matter by afternoon, flew to Delhi and finished the matter before the court rose. So he did 3 high courts in one day. Today, with the concept of virtual hearing, our well-known counsels are doing it on an average once a day. You can address one high court, and 2 minutes later address another, and an hour later be speaking in the Supreme Court or whichever other court you want to speak in. So that's the first important change that has happened, which is that client interaction and lawyer-judge interaction have completely changed so that you can virtually, just as I am speaking to you from my own house, you can address the courts at any court. And therefore, today you have Salve coming in periodically from London to address the Supreme Court or any other high court in India. Something that could have never happened had it not been for the pandemic. So that is one takeaway that we will have to keep in mind when we look at what is going to happen in the future. The second thing that has happened as a result in this, what they call the new norm or the new normal, is that clients have suddenly started becoming very, very cost conscious. There's just when businesses are going as badly as they are, when the economy has contracted by 29%, when all this is staring before you, every client comes forward and says, listen, give me a rebate. I mean, some firms like ours have sort of evolved a way by which we charge out a flat monthly retainer fee. So in that monthly retainer, we do any amount of work you want us to do. So it makes it easier for the client. It has some advantages for us and so on. So these are the two takeaways of the new normal. And when you extrapolate this and look at the next normal, which is the real topic of conversation today, the question is, what are we going to see? And I see the following things. One, as far as firms are concerned, I see an increasing number of people forming groups, and the practice of the individual practitioner is slowly going to start dwindling down. It can't dwindle away, but it will definitely dwindle down. The future is in firms for two reasons. One, litigation itself, and not just litigation, the practice of law itself has become increasingly complex. You have to be a group of people sometimes who are experts in different fields have to get together to come to a legal solution. That can't happen if you're an individual practitioner. So there will first be a safety in numbers kind of thing. Clients also will find that there is a greater safety in going towards the firms, a greater safety in going to a one-stop shop. So the first prediction I have is that the future of firms is bright in the sense that more and more individual practitioners will be turning towards either joining a firm or grouping together with a group of people and starting a firm. That is one. The second is, and this is again what I feel, that in keeping with the complexities that the law brings forward, several firms will start becoming specialist firms. Today, a lot of the IP firms are itself just that, an IP firm. We ourselves are a litigating firm and we are just that, a litigating firm. We do nothing else. There will, I feel, be an increased amount of speculation. Increased amount of specialization in the future progress and process of law. That's the second thing I predict. And the third thing I predict is that a lot of the forward-looking firms are going to start doing what they call back-ending. So you realize that it's much cheaper to run an establishment somewhere in the interiors of India, in some of the smaller towns, rather than have an establishment in the city. So you have a smaller establishment in the city and do a lot of your back-end research from the other place. And today, since the one thing that will stay, whether virtual, I was just seeing a parliamentary report which recommended that virtual hearing should remain, even post-pandemic, a part of the court proceedings. And whether they do or not is one aspect. But certainly one thing that will happen is that conferences will become virtual. Clients will no longer have to trudge up all the time to the lawyer's office and then go with the lawyer to the senior's office and things like that. It will all be done on Zoom. It will all be done on video. And that will not only save time and money, but will also allow firms to back end. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Karanjawala. I think, I could have the kind of perspective you brought, the kind of background you brought. You rightly said you have to understand the past and history to be able to make sense of the future. That's so true. And you beautifully laid out how the journey for the legal fraternity, the legal services, and the legal professionals has been. And it's a fantastic lesson for we have about more than 2,000 people watching, combined on all platforms. So it's a fantastic learning for them. And I learned a lot. One thing I've learned is that, we will need to reinvent ourselves in any business, in not only in legal services. But let me keep to the time and ask you two questions. You talked about that 1 crore fee, right? That the senior counsel charged. Post-COVID, do you see the fee structures changing?
Yes and no.
Okay, please explain.
Why? Okay, the answer is why. Why have they changed? Why have they changed in COVID, and why have they this thing? The answer is obvious, because if the client doesn't have money and if the client is doing badly, then certainly the fee structure has to change. And everyone in fact, yesterday we were having a discussion, Rajiv Nair, Manu Singhvi and myself for a particular TV show which is going to come. It's my friend Tarun Nangya's show coming up. So the first thing Manu Singhvi said was that he said, look, there is first tier, second tier, third tier, fourth tier. But this affects all of us, because at every different level, the client feels a pinch in his pocket and the client comes forward and says, look, give me a rebate. And look, we are all, after all, human. I mean, in fact, Tarun started off by reading a quotation from Salve, who said that Salve just gave a recent interview in which he gave a quotation, and he said, look, normally, if anyone ever asked me to give a discount, I would have thrown a tantrum. But in today's day and age, I look at it seeing what the client's plight is. So he said, Raian, what about you? So I said, look, I've never been fortunate enough to find myself in a position where I could ever throw a tantrum if a client asks for a discount. I have to give discounts almost every day, because that's the normal rule as far as the solicitor's firm is concerned. Clients always ask you to give a rebate. And so rebates will be given, keeping in mind the economic sort of environment in the country. But that's not going to be there permanently. As things go up, things will go back to normal. That's not going to be there. I mean, today nobody's there in a hotel. That's not going to remain forever. 1.5 years later, the hotels will be full again. So yes, this is the next normal for the next 6 months. May see, or next 1 year, may well see a shrinking of revenue. But in times to come, that will be made up for.
Raian, I also want to ask you, what is your advice to young legal leaders who are watching it, people who can benefit from your advice? And like me, when I grow up, I want to be like you. How do they become like you when they grow up?
First of all, you can't be like me, because I'm a byproduct of one basic thing. I always say this in every interview that is given. He said, I have that one quality that Napoleon looked for in every general. Before he made a man a general, he'd ask one last question. He said, is he lucky? So I've just been a byproduct of a lot of good fortune. Unfortunately, I don't think everyone gets it in the same measure, though they may well deserve it. So I don't think you should look to be like me. What you should look to be is, what is the best that I can do for myself? And I feel, and this is something I genuinely feel, that the time has come, unless you're supposing like my children who will inherit my practice. So then it's different. The firm is there to look after them. But otherwise, the time has come for you to seriously look at, and this is what Mukesh Bhutani also said in the earlier this thing, the time has come for you to seriously look at a specialization. When we joined the bar in 79, it was a general practice. Everyone was here, everyone was there, everyone did whatever he could lay his hands on. Today, clients are looking for quick and assured solutions. And that can't happen.
And holistic. And you may say holistic. I may say holistic.
But they want some certainty when they sit across the table with somebody and ask him a question. Now, you can't be that as a general practitioner, because then you have to go back to the book. But if you're a specialist, then you can answer quickly, you can answer with authority. I can tell you, for example, somewhere in the 90s, when the telecom thing started, people who specialized in telecom law, suddenly, and I mean, Rajan Mittal has always said that, he said, you know how it was, Raian, in the old days, we were all driving Mercs and the lawyers were all coming on scooters, all our telecom lawyers. Today, they're all driving Mercs. And I mean, he couldn't say that he's coming on a scooter, but nevertheless, his point was that people who have specialized, for example, all the lawyers who rode the back of the telecom wave, have suddenly done extremely well because they took a specialty and they ran with it, and they got the advantage of what specialization brings you. So I would say that for most people who want to be everything, I want to be the next Salve, I want to be the next Mukul, I want to be the next Singhi, I want to be the next Rajiv Nair, or I want to be the next whoever. Don't. Get to a specialist field, because then you have more chances of maximizing your own potential. Don't try to be what you may never be. Just try to do the best for yourself that you can.
Thank you, Mr. Karanjawala, for talking to BW Legal World and BW Business World.
Thank you.
I enjoyed my interview with you in the past. I've enjoyed your, delivery today, the content you brought in, the perspective. I'm sure all of our audiences have. For those of you who want to revisit the content that Mr. Karanjawala shared, visit our website, bwlegalworld.com, for the video interview. And the 1st October issue of BW Legal World will have the transcript of what Mr. Karanjawala just spoke. I still believe in the written world more than the kind of audio-visual world. Maybe I'm old, but thank you, Mr. Karanjawala. Your advice of being the best version of yourself, being lucky. But let me tell you, Mr. Karanjawala, you can play humble and gracious, but the harder you work, the luckier you get. So clearly what you profess in terms of being specialized, get into detailing, make yourself known for something, while Mr. Karanjawala understands everything. His firm is known for litigation. That's what they are best at. I mean, they know every aspect of law. So really, today when you order food, you order sushi food from a sushi restaurant. You order Thai food from a Thai restaurant. You don't just order, so it's an era of super specialization, while you have to understand all aspects, be a super specialist, so that you can make a mark in your profession. Thank you, Mr. Karanjawala. We look forward to seeing you again at 6:30 for the BW Legal World 40 Under 40 Awards, of which you were an integral part of the jury and really helped us make the choices. Thank you.
Anurag, I must say one thing. I'm very glad you started this 40 Under 40 Legal World. It's a great encouragement to the youngsters, and this is your first venture into that particular thing, but there should be many more, and they should be larger and larger as the years go by, because this is something that a lot of youngsters who are working hard and will look forward as one of the ways to be recognized, one of the ways to get peer recognition, one of the ways to get accolades in their profession. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Karanjawala. And you, through your deliberations, added to that. So my gratitude. Over to you, Kathy.
Thank you so much, Mr. Karanjawala and Dr. Patra, for that wonderful conversation and insights. Ladies and gentlemen, we also have Dr. Karanjawala's journey into law as an interview on our website. So please go ahead and read that on bwlegalworld.com. Moving forward, ladies and gentlemen, I hope all of you are sharing the word across with our hashtag BW Legal Dialogues. We'd be really excited to hear from all of you.